It's about time. Here are Linda Ellerbee and Ray Gandolf.
For the next hour, think of your television set as a time machine.
Tonight we're skipping back over a couple of wars to a season between World War II and Korea. That was pretty good. And as one of the hit songs put it, maybe you'll be there.
Welcome to our world. It's the autumn of 1948. It will be filled with secrets and surprises. Under secrets, look for songs, sex, and the Soviet Union. Under surprises, look for television, Truman, and the Soviet Union. But let's start here at home.
In the fall of 1948, we were not only churning out a pile of goods as big as the Great Pyramid of Egypt every hour, but we were helping to rebuild Europe under the Marshall Plan. We were prosperous and innocent.
In 1948, every sow's ear seems a silk purse.
The Vanderbilts are waiting at the club. But how are we to get there? That's the rub. That's the rub. We would sail up the avenue, but we haven't got a yacht. We would drive up the avenue, but the road we had was shot.
Detroit gives us its first totally new designs in 6 years. No more walking, no more riding. In 1948, we're ready to race.
Or in automobiles, futuramic design means styling with a purpose. There's no gear shift, no clutch pushing. Just step on the gas and go.
The only direction is up. A Chevy convertible costs $1,750. If you don't buy it today, buy it tomorrow. Don't we deserve the best of everything? Retail sales are higher than they've been since 1929. The war is over, the sale is on. The more modern, the better.
If you're in a rush to know what's de rigueur in fur for fall, how's about this leopard skin ensemble? Sweater, umbrella, and spiffy spats. Just the thing for a rainy day.
East is east and west is west, and the wrong one I have chose. Let's go where I'll keep on wearing those frills and flowers and buttons and bows, rings and things and buttons and bows.
Things aren't all we're making in record numbers.
It's magic.
Something is going on, but we keep telling ourselves good girls don't.
A mystic charm.
Doris Day, in her first movie, sets the good girl pattern.
When I am in your arms.
Rita Hayworth does the same for bad girls in the extravaganza, The Loves of Carmen.
Where are you going, little soldier? Because wherever it is, I'm going with you.
Once you're kissed by Amy.
We're told that after you marry, something happens, mysteriously. Mysteriously, that is, to good girls.
Ply her with bonbons.
Bad girls are supposed to know what happens. That's why they're bad.
Million hours.
Miss America is good. Mrs. America is a woman.
When I was a Miss, there was nothing cooking. Now that I'm Mrs. America, I'm really cooking.
Anthony and Patricia Pizzo, a young married couple in Chicago.
Girls were not supposed to do anything, or supposed to know anything, or supposed to think at all.
Boys weren't supposed to do much either in that day and age.
Oh,
I don't
really?
think why you keep saying that girls had an exclusive right to chastity and virginity.
Training films reinforce our fairy tales.
The end of a perfect evening. How do you say goodnight?
Don't leave.
What air?
One night, the Pizzos hear a talk by a biologist named Alfred C. Kinsey. He wants to study what has not been studied, human sexual behavior. He asks for volunteers. Both Pizzos sign up.
It was unusual, but he was very convincing, and he was obviously so sincere and so involved in his project that you felt that you would be remiss if you didn't follow through and help him. It seems kind of funny looking back because I really didn't have very much to tell, but it was just discussing it was very embarrassing.
We were given a card, and we were asked to measure our genitalia. And I suppose this was to determine whether this had, in fact, any kind of effect on your sexual experiences. That seemed a little bit bizarre to me at the time.
Bizarre or not, Kinsey and his colleagues ultimately get 12,000 Americans to talk, finally, about sex. John Dussault, managing editor at the company that publishes the Kinsey Report.
It tells very lucidly that the mores of sexual behavior in the United States are far different from what they are supposed to be. That the difference between public myths and private reality is indeed a great one. A curtain, in fact, which I guess some would say he tore asunder.
What the report reveals is that more people are engaging in more sex than anyone dreams. Nice girls, it turns out, do.
The immediate sale of the book was altogether astonishing to everyone. Well, everyone perhaps but Dr. Kinsey.
In the fall of 1948, we have put World War II out of mind, tried to forget it. Veterans march only in parades now. The war is nostalgia. Then a young veteran named Norman Mailer writes a novel called The Naked and the Dead. Its message isn't new. Sherman said it first, war is hell. But Mailer says it better, in words as blunt and effective as a rifle butt to the jaw. Actor Martin Sheen.
Hennessy squatted in his hole and watched the jungle. His mouth was dry and he kept wetting his lips. Every time there seemed to be a movement in the bushes, his heart constricted. The beach was very quiet. A minute went by and he began to get bored. He could hear a truck grinding its gears down the beach, and when he took a chance and turned around, he could see another wave of landing craft coming in about a mile from shore. Reinforcements for us, he told himself, and realized it was absurd. The harsh, slapping sound came out of the jungle and was followed by another discharge and another and another. That's the mortars, he thought, and decided he was catching on fast. And then he heard a screaming, piercing sound almost overhead, like the tearing squeals of a car braking to avert a crash. Instinctively, he curled flat in his hole. The next instants were lost to him. He heard an awful exploding sound which seemed to fill every corner of his mind, and the earth shook and quivered underneath him in the hole. Numbly, he felt dirt flying over him and his body being pounded by some blast. The explosion came again, and the dirt, and the shock, and then another and another blast. He found himself sobbing in the hole, terrified and resentful. When another mortar landed, he screamed out like a child, "That's enough! That's enough!" He lay there trembling for almost a minute after the shells had stopped. His thighs felt hot and wet, and at first he thought, "I'm wounded." It was pleasant and peaceful, and he had a misty picture of a hospital bed. He moved his hand back and realized with both revulsion and mirth that he had emptied his bowels.
The Naked and the Dead angered some veterans, but it reminded us all that even a, quote, good war, undertaken for the most noble of motives, debases the human spirit. In our own homes that season, we could have our spirits debased or elevated or bored by a little square box. Come back to the fall of '48 and the dawn of television.
Our World continues in a moment.
Welcome back to the autumn of 1948. Columbia Records has marketed the new vinyl long-playing phonograph record. It won't warp, won't break, well, not easily, and turns at 33 1/3 revolutions per minute instead of the old 78. Now you can hear entire movements of symphonies uninterrupted without changing records or waiting for the next one to plop down. And of course, you don't have to watch it to be entertained the way you have to watch that other new gadget, television. You don't have to watch the radio either, but millions of us do gather around it every night and stare so as not to miss a word.
The American Broadcasting Company presents the Candid Microphone.
And now to the editorial room of the Jurgens Journal and Walter Winchell.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. North and South America and all the ships at sea. Let's go to press.
This is your host bidding you enter the inner sanctum.
The Johnson's Wax Program with Fibber McGee and Molly.
I wouldn't know where to look for it, dearie.
Oh, I know where it is. It's right here in the hall closet.
Oh, no.
I got to straighten out that closet one of these days.
Consolidated sardines are packed twice as tight, so eat consolidated, can't eat consolidated. Treat your stomach right.
Experience of modern girls is superficial and insufficient to protect them against blandishments.
How could you deceive me like this? Doesn't our marriage mean anything to you?
It's hard for me to say this, Irene, but Eleanor and I love each other.
Don't talk to me about love, you vampire.
Irene.
Radio speaks and we listen to Benny, to Murrow, to Hope, to Fred Allen.
Tell me, Moody, what are your feelings about the radio?
I don't hold with it, Bub.
Displeases you?
I don't hold with furniture that talks.
Yeah.
Comedy is as familiar and comforting as a mother's kiss. The big new craze is a telephone giveaway show starring Bert Parks.
Stop the music! Hello, America! This is Bert Parks.
We went on the air, and 3 Sunday nights after we went on the air, Fred Allen dropped from number 2 to like number 30. And Stop the Music became number 2.
Comedian Henry Morgan is baffled.
In '48, it was a shock to find that a program could go on the air and offer a complete stranger an amount of money, and that people would listen to the program to hear some stranger win an amount of money.
On the Fred Allen Show, Morgan spoofs Stop the Music.
Here we go with Cease the Melody. Our first number is... Cease the Melody!
That very same night, you won't believe it, we gave away one of the most unbelievable jackpots of all time.
In Indiana, Kenneth and Gene Crosby were big fans.
Stop the Music. It was just a ritual every Sunday night.
I remember there was it was like second call, somewhere in Indiana, and a man answered the phone. His name was Crosby. And I said, we'll play the mystery tune, and if you think you know the answer, let me know, and we will give you the jackpot, which is worth $30,000.
I repeated very carefully, because you had to have every letter right. Turkeys in the tree top.
I said, you said it was turkey in the tree top. Excuse me, would you mind saying again? Turkey in the tree top?
Bert Parks yelled, he says,
"You're right!" And they won. Pandemonium.
It was the highest jackpot that had ever been won on Stop the Music at that time.
It's a most unusual day. Feel like throwing my worries away.
We were just shocked, and it really excited everybody. Well, I wanted Hudson, 1949, Hudson. My husband got a $1,000 wardrobe. Then I got the Westinghouse laundromat with the dryer and the washer, and we won a television set at that time, too, Philco, combination radio and record player. But the television at that time, we didn't have television in Bluffton.
Bluffton? No one in any part of Indiana has television, which makes Indiana like most of America. In fall 1948, 22 cities have TV stations. The combined audience is less than 500,000, and less than 10% of us have ever seen a TV program. We know that because with the first set came the first rating system. And at first, a feeling that this box is magic.
Rain soft, rinse those rain. Earl Madman Muntz, the self-styled king of the car salesman, is so taken by television, he begins making and selling his own models.
Ma or Pa wouldn't believe we could take a set and install it in their home and it would work there. They thoroughly believed in television. They believed it would work as long as they could stand in front of a store and watch. But they couldn't really visualize that thing was going to work in their living room.
Howard Fall is in Chicago, helping to put WGN-TV on the air.
There were no textbooks on it. There were no teachers. We were each feeling our own way, and you had to do everything.
Dennis James is one of TV's first stars. He introduces Americans to TV wrestling.
Well, I'd never seen wrestling even, so I bought a little book, and I'm at ringside, and I'm thumbing through the pages. Now, that's how I learned the holds. Then I said to myself, this is silly. If I try to play this thing straight, I'm dead. So I tried to create different ideas to get some comedy.
Which way will I go? Ref. Ref. Hammerlock.
Flip through the ring, I'd use the slide whistle like this. Right? And then, of course, one of the most exciting things was when they would break a bone, turn the wrist this way, they would be like close-up of that, but maybe a step over toe hold, and I had a crackle bone that went. Well, the combination of seeing that and hearing this, that caused about 10,000 pieces of mail to come in, and there weren't much more than 10,000 people looking at it at the time.
But in 1 year, 1948, the audience jumps 4,000%. By November, there are 43 TV stations.
Manufacturers are making sets as fast as they can. 200 different models are available. And a new industry is creating itself as fledgling networks invent programs to fill the holes, to cover the black, as it were. By fall, most of the holes are filled in. And Tuesday night is the Saturday night of television.
Sky tea, fill up with sky tea, and you will smile at the pile of new
Uncle Milty. Theaters and restaurants lose business as we buy television sets to see what all the noise is about. Here is what it is all about.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, introducing America's #1 television star, who, like Lady Godiva, horses around every Tuesday night, Milton Berle.
They were making a change back behind me, and a big pipe fell and made such a noise, it went bang. And I looked around, I said, CBS just dropped another show. Well, those were ad-libs, right? And I had to do that. And that's what made, I think, the spontaneity of those early days Texaco shows made the show what it was.
If the Berle show is the peak, how deep are our valleys? Hollywood warns its biggest stars away from TV, so the tube takes what it can get and invents the rest.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Sit down. See? I told you not to read the letter. You deliberately read it.
Well, I'm walking off the stage.
Why do you want to leave me, Flat?
I'm getting sick of being pushed around by you.
Who's pushing
you? You are. You get a kick out of making a fool of me. I stand out there when you're singing numbers. When I come out here, you munch my hair, you dirty my clothes, you push me around, you ridicule me, you abuse me, and I'm serious. Why don't you leave me alone?
It's right to say that this was a time when television exploded into our consciousness, but it's important to remember that in the fall of 1948, the majority of Americans did not have TV. Therefore, when we thought of news, we still thought of newspapers and radio. And both were filled with stories of a nation taking extraordinary measures to feed the same people it recently had bombed. Come back to a tale of the surprise packages, the white chickens, and the candy bomber.
Come back to Secrets and Surprises in the fall of '48.
Welcome back to the autumn of 1948, a season of secrets and surprises. Take sex. When Kinsey got people to tell him their sexual secrets, the truth surprised everybody. Take television. If the fact of it weren't surprise enough, the future of it would be. Take promises. Like secrets, they just didn't seem to be kept these days.
After World War II, all Germany was divided into 4 parts, governed by the 4 conquering powers, Britain, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Deep inside the Soviet zone, Berlin, the capital, also was divided into 4 parts, with the Western Allies guaranteed access to Berlin through the Soviet zone. But by 1948, the Soviets are disturbed about the plans of the Western powers to revitalize Germany, especially by establishing a new common currency in the Allied zones. So the Soviets begin squeezing off access points and roads and railways into Berlin. And one day in June, with a Berliners be damned attitude, the Soviets seal off the western sections of the city entirely. Overnight, without warning, Germans in the 3 western sectors of Berlin are cut off from the outside world. No power, no food, no one allowed in or out. "185 square miles, most of it still rubble from Allied bombs, is totally surrounded by Soviet troops. Only the air is open. So President Truman sends in supplies by plane to maintain the Allied foothold in Berlin. It's called the Berlin Airlift. Stuart Symington was Secretary of the Air Force.
I think we felt we had as much right to be in Berlin as the Russians did, even though we let them go in first. And if we'd given up Berlin, I think it's fair to say that we felt we would be giving up Germany. And that could have been disastrous to the future. The British are also part of the airlift. One of their pilots, Freddie Laker.
We found ourselves with a new enemy that was indeed much more formidable than Germany itself.
It's a rescue effort of unprecedented magnitude. Hundreds of planes flying round the clock, trying to feed and clothe 2.5 million people, trying literally to save their lives. For Lieutenant Gail Halverson, it's a mission worthy of the Good Samaritan.
To provide the sustenance for life in a city that was besieged, cut off, tried to starve them into submission. We felt we had a purpose, and we didn't complain about flying all night or all day.
Whatever hate I had for the Germans because of the war, I can assure you it disappeared in a few days after going onto the airlift.
For pilot Jack Bennett, the night shift is extra tough.
Suddenly there was a flash of light in our eyes, co-pilot and I, like the sun going down. Well, the sun was behind us. We couldn't figure out what was wrong. And the Russians mounted an enormously powerful searchlight over here in East Berlin and tried to blind us.
Occasionally there were, the MiGs would buzz the aeroplanes, and that was all rather frightening, and they come alongside and waggle in their wings, but no one took any notice. No one was going to follow them, for example.
Still, the airlift continues. By September, more than 4,000 tons of supplies are coming in every day. Planes are landing 3 minutes apart.
If the airlift brings food to the city, it also brings nightmares to some of the city's children. Mercedes Wild is 8 years old. She lives in Berlin.
Dadurch, dass vorher wir durch Bombenabwürfe
Our nerves had been shattered by bombing raids as children. This was a new strain. We children in the flight path couldn't sleep well because the airplanes flew down pretty low. And the child is small, the house is tall, and the airplane is right over it. It makes a strong impression.
One day, during his layover in Berlin, Lieutenant Halverson gives away 2 sticks of gum he happens to have on him.
And you couldn't believe the look on the kid's face. They got a half a stick of gum, just like they got $1 million. And they unwrapped the wrapper very carefully, and the other kids wanted the wrapper. They passed the wrapper around for their kids to smell. I couldn't believe it. So I told the kids, if you'll come back here tomorrow, stand in that open place, right in front of the runway, I'll drop enough gum and candy that you'll all have some if you'll share it.
Just a little loving will go a long way. Ooh, yeah. And to make me
Put your arms around.
Before long, drops are being made every day, and this American lieutenant now has a nickname. He is the Candy Bomber.
Ich bekam keinen Fallschirm. Kam nach
I didn't
Hause
get a
und
parachute,
erzählte,
so I wrote a letter saying,
Lieber Schokoladenonkel, bitte wirf mir einen Fallschirm ab.
Dear Chocolate Uncle, please drop me a candy parachute. I'm sure you'll recognize this house. It's the one with the white chickens in the garden. Best wishes, your Mercedes.
Ja, viele Grüße, deine Mercedes.
So I started looking for white chickens, and I couldn't find them. I told my buddies, hey, look for the white chickens, we got a drop to make. Nobody could find it.
Einige Zeit später.
Later, I got a letter from my chocolate uncle. He wrote that he tried to find the garden with the chickens, but he couldn't. So he enclosed some candy and chewing gum. For me as a child, this was a big surprise.
The airlift is expected to be over in a few weeks, but the Soviets refuse to lift the blockade, even into October when the United Nations asks them to.
A compromise proposal for settling the Berlin blockade receives the familiar treatment, this time from the Soviet's Deputy Foreign Minister, Andrei Vyshinsky. And the Berlin crisis continues.
The Soviets veto, but they never attack.
Because they knew we had the bomb, and they didn't have it.
The line is drawn. There are ever so many who will say the actions of the Soviet Union came as no surprise to them and should in fact have been foreseen. Come back to the fall of '48 and a surprise that few are bold enough to claim they foresaw.
Come back to Our World and Secrets and Surprises in the fall of '48.
Welcome back to the autumn of 1948. There's a presidential campaign going on, but nobody takes it very seriously because everybody already knows who's going to win.
The next president, can you see all right, Howdy? Attaboy. Of the kids of the United States is Howdy Doody. Hey, we're in Howdy Doody.
November 2nd, Election Day, 1948. Every child in the country whose family has a TV set knows Howdy Doody has been elected president of all the kids of America. No big surprise here.
If Howdy Doody had won the real election, he wouldn't have been much more surprising than the man who did. The Chicago Tribune didn't seem to believe it, even after it happened. But Harry Truman did win, despite a couple of renegade candidates from his own party who siphoned off about 1 million votes apiece from his total, and despite the fact that he was considered an accidental president who was in office only because he was vice president when Franklin Roosevelt died.
A nice man, Truman, but in over his head, they say. Truman's campaign strategist and advisor is Clark Clifford.
Roosevelt's reputation had been so enormous. He brought the country through its worst depression in history. He brought them through the greatest war in history. And then all of a sudden came this modest, rather plain-speaking, simple fellow from Midwestern United States, from Missouri. The people didn't take to him very much.
Everybody's doing the doghouse boogie now.
The people, they say, are angry because Truman hasn't prevented prices from rising after the war. But what can you expect from a failed businessman, a small-time politician who isn't and never will be FDR? Truman doesn't make jokes, he is one. To err is Truman.
There are, however, some people with true liberal convictions who worry over the state of the world,
I pray God that I may deserve this opportunity to serve our country. In all humility, I accept the nomination.
The beggar man and the mighty king are only different in that.
Tom Dewey, on the other hand, is dashing and experienced. As New York's gang-busting district attorney from the Depression, and now the governor of the Empire State, Roosevelt country, Dewey's the best-known Republican in the land. Young, short, but stylish.
Like I, hold your head up high.
A man who can strut while sitting down.
I pledge to you that on next January 20,
there will begin in Washington the biggest unraveling, unsnarling, untangling operation in our nation's history.
There are other candidates, but with Truman's luck, 2 of them are from his own party.
Henry A. Wallace, pacifist leader of the Progressive Party, which attracted left-wing support. J. Strom Thurmond of the States' Rights Party, opposing the president's civil rights program.
Well, we were making the fight in the 1948 campaign on the basis of federal power versus state power. It was not a racist fight so far as we were concerned.
That there's not enough troops in the Army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negro race into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches.
It's not that Thurmond or Wallace is expected to win. It's that they are expected to get just enough votes to make it certain Truman will lose. Newspaperman H.L. Mencken writes, "I'm inclined to think Dewey is the best candidate. Thurmond is handicapped by having the worst morons of the South for him. Wallace has the communist around his neck. And as for the Honorable Mr. Truman," writes Mencken, "it is only his immense unfitness for the job that got him the nomination." Truman sees it differently. And so on Labor Day, September 6th, he takes off in this train, in this car, the Ferdinand Magellan. He's not so much doing battle with the other candidates as he is taking his case to the people, who will ultimately decide.
We gotta get...
First major speech is in Dexter, Iowa, the site of the national plowing matches. The man in charge is Herbert Plambeck, farm director at radio station WHO in Des Moines.
People came streaming in. They were there at 8 o'clock in the morning. Buses came, and we knew we had quite a day on our hands.
A friend takes colored pictures of the historic occasion because Herb has been chosen to greet the president.
Now, I must tell you, that's a bit of a heady experience for a country boy. We arrived there amidst that tremendous throng of people. They were 10 deep on each side of the car. Mr. Truman was just delighted. It was obvious that this was his kind of a party. And he met my mother, who had come there. My father was a little bit reluctant to come in there. He was a good Republican, and he didn't know whether this was for him or not. But my mother had no such qualms.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I was chosen to do the introduction.
the President of the United States.
He started out very presidential and very patriotic, but not very long. His object was to give a message to the 80th Congress, and he did.
The Wall Street reactionaries are not satisfied with being rich. They want to increase their power and their privileges. They are gluttons of privilege. This Republican Congress has already stuck a pitchfork in the farmer's back.
Our people were listening, and they were considering what would be best for them, and they found that here in this particular circumstance, Mr. Truman was looking a lot better than way down in last place.
All right, I'm doing it.
Tom Dewey wouldn't think of giving anybody hell.
You had the whole momentum, you had the whole atmosphere of being on the winning ticket.
Clifton White was on the executive committee of Youth for Dewey.
Polls, which of course were very new, all said Dewey would win. But what was equally important, all politicians and all newspaper people said he was going to win. Real estate people, they were selling their houses in Washington to Dewey's cabinet.
But when Dewey's personal secretary, Lillian Ross, screens his mail, she finds concern.
At that time, Truman was doing a lot of bombasting against the governor, and they couldn't understand his not answering him in kind.
Dewey has been advised not to match barbs with the underdog.
We believe in honesty, loyalty, fair play, concern for our neighbors. the innate ability of men to achieve.
Be cool, his advisors say. Don't blow it.
By our faith in God are the inner meaning of the American way of life.
Harold Stassen has campaigned for Dewey across the country.
By holding back on these issues, he gave an impression of sort of talking above the people and not being decisive. So finally, in about the first part of October, I went up to see Governor Dewey, and I told him, I don't like what I hear around the country. I said, I think you've got to take stronger stands. And he smiled and opened up this drawer of his desk. I could just see him today. He pulled out of there and handed me, without a word, a Roper pole. And I looked at it, and it showed a, incredible lead for Dewey.
But that's old news. Elmo Roper and his son Burns have stopped taking polls because Elmo said so.
He felt, based on his experience, that nothing changed after Labor Day, that all of the volatility was before the candidates were nominated, and once they were both nominated and squared off, opinion was decided and nothing happened.
Other polls continued, though. The results of a Newsweek poll of 50 political experts reaches Harry Truman on his train.
Truman 0, Dewey 50. Not one of the 50 experts polled felt that Truman could win. I got back on the train. I had to walk through the president's car to get to my berth. I had it under my coat, and he said, I think you've got a copy of Newsweek there, and I had to show it to him. He took a look at it. He says, not one of those fellas has enough sense to know what the hell he's doing.
Election day is wet and gloomy in Missouri.
Whether skies are gray or blue. This is Frank Burkholzer in Independence, Missouri. The official word is that in a little while, Mr. Truman will try to forget the 1948 elections and get some sleep.
In Chicago, the Tribune comes out with its famous headline, against the advice of political reporter Walter Trohan.
Dewey defeats Truman. It was positive. There was no welching on it at all, or no way to retreat from it.
By 9 o'clock, the paper is on the streets. In the fall of 1948, I was a sophomore at Northwestern University here in Evanston, Illinois. I didn't vote in that election. 18-year-olds did not have the franchise then. I kind of liked Harry Truman, but my interest was tepid at best in the election. I was kind of sorry that he was going to lose. Anyway, on election night, I was out somewhere, don't remember where. I was returning home to my Quonset hut lodgings about 11 o'clock at night, passed a newsstand, looked down, and there was that early edition of the Chicago Tribune. Dewey defeats Truman. Well, I said, that figures. I clucked my tongue and went on home and never bought the paper. In New York City, at Dewey headquarters, Lillian Ross looks for her husband, Alan Goodridge, who is tracking the vote.
The corridors were jammed with men and women in evening clothes with champagne in their hand, talking and laughing and celebrating already. I could hardly get through to get to his room, but I finally managed to get there, and I walked in. He was sitting behind his desk, and he was as white as a sheet. And I said, Goody, what's wrong? And he never answered me. And finally, one of his men came from across the hall. I said, what's wrong with Goody? He doesn't answer me. He said, well, I'm sure he knows the governor has lost the election. This was about 8:15.
And here is Senator J. Howard McGrath to make a statement.
Everybody ready? Okay. I am speaking to you at almost 3 o'clock in the morning. I feel very confident that President Truman and Senator Barkley will be the next president and vice president of the United States. However, I am not at this hour predicting the outcome.
You know, the story about mixed emotions, seeing your mother-in-law drive off a cliff in your new Cadillac. Well, we had some of that because actually, I think at that time, every principal in the firm had voted for Truman. So here we saw our man winning and the company going down the tubes because of the Dewey prediction.
I got a call, I think about 8 o'clock in the morning, to come in to the governor's suite. And I went in, and he said, Miss Ross, I want to dictate a telegram to Truman, congratulating him on his win.
I've sent the following wire to President Truman. My heartiest congratulations to you on your election and every good wish for a successful administration.
Ladies and gentlemen, elected in his own right, the President of the United States.
The next morning, we were on the way back on the train to Washington.
Truman and Administrative Aide Donald Dawson have a jolly breakfast.
And he pulled out this Chicago Tribune, which I had never seen, and he showed it to me, and he says, Don, he says, I'm going to have a lot of fun with this today.
Did he ever? If I had bought this newspaper before it was retrieved from the newsstand, it would be worth anywhere from $300 to $500 today at a dealer's. At an auction recently, one copy brought over $1,000. There's a lesson there somewhere. Come back for some more legacies from the fall of 1948.
Our World continues in a moment.
Harry Truman once said that men don't change, that the only new thing in the world is the history you don't know yet. We said our show was about secrets and surprises. Here is some of the history that in the autumn of 1948, they didn't know yet.
The candy bomber returned to Berlin in 1972.
People kept asking us out. We couldn't accept all the invitations. But this one came month after month after month. And finally we said, we got to go to this family. The lady of the house, whom I didn't know except Mrs. Vilt, took me upstairs to their apartment, opened the door. It's a china cabinet, pulled out an old letter and handed it to me. She said, read this. I took it out, dated in November, 1948. It said, Dear Mercedes, I can't find the white chicken in your backyard. I've been flying around and around, but I hope this package will make it all right with you. So you silly pilot, I'm Mercedes.
The Berlin airlift continued through the brutal winter of 1948. On May 12, 1949, the Soviets lifted the blockade. America and her allies had kept the city alive for nearly a year. In 1961, the Soviet Union isolated Berliners once again, this time from each other. The Berlin Wall still stands, a chilling symbol of the Cold War.
Mailer's graphic novel seemed less graphic after television showed us more about war than we wanted to know.
Today, at least 32 people were killed and more than 100
Television shows us more of everything. What Dr. Kinsey uncovered turned out to be the sexual revolution, and though we hear we're doing it less, we talk about it more today.
I hope that the men who see good-looking women can get sexually aroused, even can have an erection. The women can get sexually aroused, but then they go home and they have good sex with their respective partners.
Game shows moved to television in 1948.
Give us another throw and see if you can identify this one. Ready with bell and buzzer. Okay, Lou? Nina? Oh, challenge. You didn't even wait till the throw was over. What do you say it was, Mr. Bates? That was the circle throw. The circle throw is right, and we crown a new champion.
And prize money outruns inflation.
She got her dream, oh, honey.
We did a survey after we blew it in 48 to find out what went wrong.
After the 1948 Truman-Dewey election, well, the pollsters were still trying to figure it out.
We asked people whether they voted in last Tuesday's election and who they voted for. And we had Thomas Dewey elected again.
For Truman, victory was sweet and personal. Who could blame him for making fun of the pundits?
That when the country vote comes in, Mr. Truman will be defeated by an overwhelming majority.
Truman went to the people to get the votes. Today, he would go to television, even if more people watch TV than vote.
No one anywhere is saying the job of president is too big for one person. President Reagan.
And by the way, in 1948, this Republican was a Democrat.
Well, there it is, the way it was for a few months in the autumn of 1948. I shared with many Americans in the surprises of that season, in Truman's confounding re-election, in the revelations of Alfred Kinsey, in the day-after-day heroism of the Berlin Airlift. But my happiest, most vivid memory is the triumph of the Cleveland Indians over the Boston Braves in the World Series. The Indians' first World Championship since 1920, and their last one. Well, as we remarked at the outset, it was an innocent time, no matter what Kinsey said.
Innocent? That summer, the national political conventions were broadcast on television for the first time, and it took almost no time for politicians to stop squirming in front of and start playing to the camera. Television was equally seduced, quickly ignoring substance if it lacked style. Was this innocence or ignorance? You must judge. I can't be trusted. I don't run for office. I work for television. Therefore, I look at the presidential campaign of 1948 not as the first time television covered the thing, but as the last time nobody blamed television for its outcome. And so it goes.
These things also happened in the fall of 1948.
In Hollywood, Robert Mitchum was indicted for smoking marijuana.
Time magazine, reporting the story, felt obliged to explain what marijuana was.
Greta Garbo applied for U.S. citizenship.
The New York City Ballet, George Balanchine, artistic director, made its debut.
Campbell's V8 juice made its debut.
Wild Rex Barney of the Brooklyn Dodgers pitched a no-hitter against the New York Giants.
In Santa Fe, New Mexico, Martha Graham and her dance partner Eric Hawkins were married.
Hedy Lamarr and actor John Loder were divorced.
Mildred Elizabeth Gillers, alias Axis Sally, was indicted for treason for her pro-Nazi broadcast in World War II.
And 4-year-old Linda Ellerbee, testing her theory that she could fly, jumped out of a chinaberry tree and broke her arm.